1922, the beginning. On September 1922, the inaugural Washington State Amateur was held at Yakima Country Club, a 9-hole layout which covered 3,000 yards and was bordered by apple and pear orchards. Bon Stein would defeat Clark Spears in the final match 3-2 to win the inaugural championship. Stein would win 4 of the first 5 championships. On the final day of play, championship organizers met in the clubhouse to elect officers and discuss the upcoming year, officially forming the Washington State Golf Association. A.S. Carey was installed as its first chairman of the board, and Grays Harbor Country Club was selected as the site of the next year's amateur championship. 8 successful Washington State Amateur Championships held in the 1920s had made golf healthier than ever across the state and financially enabled the official launch of the WSGA. In the 1929 event, 24 clubs entered golfers, up 9 from the previous year, and involving nearly every private facility in operation statewide. 6 weeks following the 1929 Washington State Amateur, the New York Stock Exchange crashed, sending the country, and everything along with it, spiraling into the Great Depression. The 1930s. During the Great Depression, golf was still a relatively new undertaking, but it served its purpose during these harsh times, giving people a much-needed escape and diversion. The WSGA did its part by continuing to conduct the Washington State Amateur each year and encouraging people of all abilities to play wherever they could. The great Bobby Jones, who had won the Grand Slam in 1930, played an exhibition in 1934 at Seattle Golf Club with 3 Washington State Amateur champions, Johnny Shields, Harry Guyven, and Scotty Campbell. Shields won the State Amateur 3 times in the 1930s. In 1938, Bud Ward won the Washington Open and the Washington State Amateur. The only other player to win both titles in the same year is Fred Couples, who did it in 1978. The 1940s, the war years. In 1940, the association filed for articles of incorporation with the state. The paperwork that was submitted stated the association's mission as twofold: to conduct the annual championship and to promote golf throughout the state. While most other golf championships were canceled in the early 1940s during World War II, the Washington Men's Amateur continued on. The championship's format was changed during the war, being played as stroke play instead of match play, reducing the number of days from 5 to 2, and being held only on weekends because all the players were committed to wartime occupations during the week. During the war, several area golf courses were requisitioned by the military, with clubhouses used by servicemen and women, and the courses themselves became spaces used for military supplies. Scotty Campbell became known as the wartime player, winning 3 titles in a row, 1939, 1940, and 1941. He remains the only player to win 3 consecutive titles. He served in the Navy during World War II. The Athletic Roundtable in Spokane had remarkable success promoting golf in the state. They organized the 1941 U.S. Amateur Public Links at Indian Canyon and sponsored the 1944 PGA Championship at Manitou Golf and Country Club and the inaugural U.S. Women's Open at Spokane Country Club in 1946. They also sponsored a PGA Tour event in 1945 and 1947 at Indian Canyon and brought Ben Hogan in to play an exhibition. The 1950s, decade of growth. In keeping with the booming growth during the post-World War II years, the WSGA continued to grow in membership. At the 1950 annual meeting, the WSGA proposed holding regional meetings to stimulate growth in more cities across the state. During the baby boomer decade, the Washington Men's Amateur welcomed various celebrity players who teed it up in the annual championship, creating a buzz around the event. A little-known golfer named Gene Littler played in the 1950 Washington Men's Amateur, losing in the quarterfinals. 3 years later, Littler won the U.S. Amateur and in 1961 won the U.S. Open, well on his way to a World Golf Hall of Fame career. Legendary singer and actor Bing Crosby, who was voted as Most Admired Man Alive in 1948, learned the game as a caddy at Downriver Golf Course in Spokane. He played to a 2 handicap and competed in the 1955 Washington Men's Amateur, held that year at Spokane Country Club, but did not qualify for match play. Success began to show in the women's side of the game as well. Beginning in 1955, there was a 13-year period during which there were only 2 years when a Washington golfer was not in the final match of the U.S. Women's Amateur. The 1960s, the game gets younger. Over its first 4 decades, the Washington Men's Amateur presented the championship trophy to a wide array of golfers that included businessmen, insurance brokers, stockbrokers, future golf professionals, military officers, a postal worker, a shipyard worker, a shoe salesman, and even a future U.S. congressman. However, the 1960s brought a decided shift to the kind of player who won this championship. These were guys who carried golf bags with school colors, answered to team nicknames, and took final exams. Collegians. The 1960s saw players with multiple wins in the state amateur. Tom Story won 3 titles. Kermit Zarley won twice. Don Scott won back-to-back titles in 1968 and 1969. Bill Wright competed in the 1960 Washington Men's Amateur, just 2 months after winning the NAIA Collegiate Individual title. In 1959, Wright had become the first African American to win a USGA National Championship, winning the U.S. Amateur Public Links. Many competitors of this era would later become the foundation of the state's golf community. Bill Tyndall won the 1960 U.S. Junior Amateur, was a finalist in the 1963 Washington Men's Amateur, and would be known as the Pros Pro among the region's PGA professionals. Bruce Richards, a 2-time All-American while playing for the University of Washington, led the 1966 Washington Men's Amateur until the final hole. He would later serve as a trustee for the Pacific Coast Golf Association, as a board member for the First Tee of Greater Seattle, and on the USGA Executive Committee. He was inducted into the Pacific Northwest Golf Hall of Fame in 2013. The 1970s. Watergate, disco, post-Vietnam War, founding of Apple and Microsoft, and lots of golf. Standouts from the 1970s included Rick Wyhe, who won the 1970 Washington Men's Amateur. He would later win the 1998 Washington Senior Amateur and the 2015 Super Senior Amateur. Bob Burton, who was the only player to win the Washington State Junior Championship, the Washington Men's Amateur, and the Washington Senior Men's Amateur. Other shooting stars included Bill Sander, who later played 15 years on the PGA Tour before being inducted into the Pacific Northwest Golf Hall of Fame in 2019. The WSGA helped launch the Washington Junior Golf Association in 1977, providing financial and administrative support. The WJGA's first state champions in 1977 were Fred Couples for the boys' championship and Kathy McNeely for the girls. The second half of this decade will forever be marked by the meteoric rise of Fred Couples. He won 3 regional junior titles, the Washington Open and Washington Men's Amateur in 1978, the 1979 BC Amateur, and was low amateur at the 1979 U.S. Open. He turned pro in 1980 on his way to a World Golf Hall of Fame career. The 1980s. Connie Guthrie dominated regional amateur golf in the 1950s, winning 3 PNGA Women's Amateur titles and a Washington State Women's Golf Association title, but it was in the 1980s that she gained national prominence, winning the U.S. Senior Women's Amateur twice. The Washington Senior Men's Amateur was introduced in 1987. It was the first new championship added to the calendar since the inaugural Men's Amateur in 1922. Charles Draper Sr. served in some sort of WSGA capacity for 3 decades and was president in 1979 and 1980 and executive director from 1986 to 1991. He never took a salary. John Bodenhammer won the 1981 Washington Men's Amateur. Charles Draper handed the championship trophy to John. 10 years later, Bodenhammer would replace Draper as WSGA executive director. The 1990s. Association comes into its own. On March 1, 1990, John Bodenhammer became executive director of the PNGA and a year later the WSGA. He would guide both associations for the next 21 years. Through several tense meetings during 1990 and 1991, the Pacific Northwest Golf Association and the WSGA negotiated a realignment between the 2 associations. The WSGA would now perform all core benefits for the state golfers, including handicapping and course rating. George Holland provided a diplomatic hand in guiding the realignment. He served 2 terms as WSGA president from 1985 to 1986 and 1993 to 1995. The WSGA held the first Evans Cup fundraiser in 1992, raising $5,000 for the Caddy Scholarship Program. Now, the annual event raises more than $300,000 each year. Starting in the 1990s, Dr. Jim Allison and Dr. John Wagner led the efforts for the Evans Scholarship Program in Washington. Wagner would also serve as WSGA president from 1996 to 1998. The inaugural Washington Women's Amateur was held in 1994. For the first time, the state now had a championship open to all women's players from public courses and private clubs. The game continues to grow in the late 1990s, thanks in part to the ascendancy of Tiger Woods. WSGA membership numbers are now over 94,000 golfers. The 2000s. The first decade of the new century saw a significant expansion in offerings from the association, from competitions to benefits to services. New playing opportunities launched during these years included the Senior Women's Amateur, Women's Floorball, Member Club Team, Super Senior Men's Amateur, Parent-Child, and the Men's and Women's Champion of Champions. Ann Swanson won the inaugural Senior Women's Amateur in 2000. She won it again the next year and also in 2008. She was inducted into the Pacific Northwest Golf Hall of Fame in 2007. Siblings Paige and Brock McKenzie are the only sister-brother combo to have won the state's premier amateur championships. Brock won the men's amateur in 2001, and Paige won the women's amateur in 2002 on her home course of Yakima Country Club. To recognize excellence in competition, the WSGA introduced the Player of the Year Award in 2007 to be given annually in the categories of men, women, senior women, men's mid-amateur, women's mid-amateur, junior boys, and junior girls. On April 30th, 2007, the WSGA and PNGA purchased a newly built golf course in DuPont, Washington. 60 days later, on June 29th, the course opened to the public as the home course. In 2008, the WSGA revitalized the Golf Alliance of Washington, aligning the state's associations to speak as one voice for the golf community. Sharon Johnston, who had served on the WSGA Executive Committee and was the Championship Committee chairperson for 10 years, became the first woman president of the WSGA in 2008 and 2009. The 2010s, time of transition. The expansion of playing opportunities continues during this decade, as the WSGA launches the men's and women's mid-amateurs, Super Senior Women's Amateur, the Senior Men's and Senior Women's Champion of Champions, and the Mixed Chapman. After serving as the WSGA's CEO Executive Director for 21 years, John Bodenhammer leaves the Northwest in 2011 for his new role as Chief Championship Officer at the USGA. Troy Andrew, who had served numerous roles on the WSGA staff since 1999, replaces Bodenhammer as the new CEO Executive Director. In 2016, the WSGA Youth on Course program is launched, enabling young golfers ages 6 to 18 to play for just $5 a round, with the WSGA subsidizing the remainder of the green fee. In 2017, Joe Highsmith, at age 17, became the youngest champion of the Washington Men's Amateur. R.J. Mankey won the Washington Men's Amateur in 2018 and 2021, becoming the championship's first multiple winner in 52 years. With Golf for Everyone as its new mantra, in 2019, the WSGA rebrands as Washington Golf. In 2021, Kennedy Knox won the Washington Women's Amateur, SWGA City Championship, WJGA Junior State Championship, and PNGA Junior Girls Amateur. This is the first time in history that someone has won all 4 titles in the same year. After a century in existence, Washington Golf now caters to a membership that is 75% public players, whereas in the beginning, it represented predominantly private clubs. Washington Golf continues to increase benefits and playing opportunities for its members, launching a net 4-ball match play event, casual golf days, one-day winter series events, you-on-course memberships for college-age students, among others. We now have a century of history in our back pocket, and we know that we stand upon the shoulders of every golfer who swung a club on the first tee, every golf course that broke ground and nurtured its members, every superintendent who mowed a green at dawn, every youthful caddy who happily carried a bag bigger than themselves, every volunteer who drove the miles to spend their days behind the scenes, knowing how fragile it all is and how mighty it all is. Over time, they all became giants in our eyes. For here we are, all these years later, the accumulation to this point of all that has gone before. And our glad hope is that future generations will stand upon our shoulders and theirs upon theirs for decades to come, to enjoy this game and walk upon these favored fairways at play in the fields and in the mountains and on the prairies all throughout Washington Golf territory. Play golf, have fun. The end.